Hello! It's break time. It's break time. I think it's 11 o'clock. I'm not entirely sure, but 11 o'clock on Tuesday mornings is break time. Time for a break and time for a story. So I'm coming live, I hope, from the Storytelling Centre, which is wonderful. So here we are at the Storytelling Centre at home. And there you are at home. And we're all at home, which means it's rather a magic. We can all be at home, but we can be together. We can be together for some stories. And stories are a lovely, lovely way of being together. So today I've got some stories for you for break time. So I hope everybody's sitting comfortably. Now, back in the old days, they used to say that when getting ready for a story, they would say, "Are you sitting comfortably?" And then, so people would get comfy. Well, I'm quite comfy. I'm quite comfy in my chair here. Now, my name's Lizzie McDougall, and I'm a storyteller, and I live in the Highlands. And with me, I have the Highland story quilts. You can see the pictures behind me. And they're all of stories. Stories from the Highlands. I love stories. I hope you love stories. And I love listening to stories and then seeing the pictures in my head. When I listen to stories, I see pictures in my head. When you listen to stories, do you see all the pictures in your head? I like to then draw the pictures, what I see of the stories. And that's why I've made these quilts. These quilts are all pictures of stories. And lots of people have helped make them. And so it's super. I hope that some of them are watching. Some of the people who helped make these wonderful quilts are watching too. Now, I'm going to start by telling you one of my favourite stories. And this was a request from a wee boy called Ethan, and he suggested I tell this story. And I was so pleased because it's one of my favourite stories, because it's about a storyteller. Yes. Now you see, are you sitting comfortably? Right. Now you see, back long ago in the long ago days, long ago, before there was electricity invented, people didn't have iPad and they didn't have Xbox and they didn't have television. No. So instead, in the corner of the room where we might have a television, sometimes somebody would have a chair and they'd sit in the chair and tell stories. Now, this story happened in a castle. Now, this castle was one of the grandest castles. And the clan chief who had this castle, he had the best of everything. He had a wonderful cook who could cook great feasts of fabulous food. And he had a piper who played the bagpipes. And he had a harp player who played the harp beautifully to help him sleep at night. And he also had a storyteller who sat on a chair in the corner of the room. There we are. There was a storyteller sitting in his chair. Now, quite a lot of the day he would just doze. And then people would come and say, "Tell us that story." And he'd tell them the story. Well, now one morning he was sitting in his chair and he was dozing, when in came the clan chief and said, "Right, I want you to tell a new story tonight. I've invited lots of people to come. There's people coming from all over the world to hear your story tonight. And the cook's cooked a fantastic meal. We're going to have a great feast. And the piper's got some new tunes and the class act player, and they'll be playing for some dancing. So we're wanting a good story, but I want a new story." And with that, he left. Oh dear, thought the storyteller, a new story. You see, the storyteller was feeling a bit sleepy and a bit achy. It was like was cold, and it was a cold castle, and the cold had got into his bones. Oh dear, thought the storyteller. And he thought, oh, I know, I'll get that fire going a bit better. So he put a few more sticks on the fire, and then the flames started coming up. And that was a little better when he got some bigger sticks and a log, a nice big log. And he put the big log on the fire, and he watched as the heat from the fire came. And it came, and it was making him feel really nice. Oh, that was lovely. And he was gazing into the fire when he saw something really strange. You see, there was a hole in the log, and in it he could see two shiny eyes. And suddenly out popped an owl. And the owl flew all around the castle, all around the great hall. And then the owl came above the storyteller's head. And the owl spoke to the storyteller. And the owl said, I know your problem. You haven't a new story. But come with me. Come with me. Come with me. And with that, the storyteller found himself lifting up into the air. And before he knew it, he was flying. He was flying too. And he followed the owl, and he followed the owl flying back and forth around the hall. Now there was a window open, and the owl flew out the window, and the storyteller followed. And he went and he followed, flying, until they came to a beautiful wood. And the owl sat on top of a branch in this beautiful Scots pine tree. And it was big enough for the storyteller to sit too. And he was sitting up there on this lovely branch in the tree, looking around. What a beautiful wood it was. All the little animals and all the birds were all chirping, and he was listening, and it was just magical and wonderful. But then he began to understand. The birds were worried. There was no water. And the birds were all gathered around the little spring where the water normally came. But it had dried up, and it had become all greasy and yucky and not very nice. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, were going the little birds. When suddenly a wind came through the woods, but it was a happy wind, and as the wind came through the woods, it was as if all the leaves were laughing. And then beams of light came through the wood. Beams of pure, lovely white light came beaming through the woods, and suddenly out of that appeared the most beautiful white horse you have ever seen, with a long, long white mane. And as it tossed its head, what did they see? But on its forehead it had a unique horn. A unique horn. It was a unicorn. It was the magic unicorn of Scotland. And this wonderful, beautiful unicorn came slowly over to the bank where the spring had sprung. And the unicorn with his long horn placed his young horn into the mossy bank and opened up the spring. And suddenly water, clear crystal water, was gushing out of the hillside. And the unicorn moved with his feet. He pawed with his feet and got rid of all the old muddy bits. And the well filled up with this beautiful crystal water. And the unicorn drank from this water. And he then tossed his head, and his great white mane went all around, all scattered with little bits of water, which in the sunlight turned into a rainbow. And it was the most beautiful thing you could ever imagine seeing. And the storyteller was absolutely entranced. And then, of course, the unicorn went. The unicorn went galloping off, galloping away. But the storyteller thought, did that really, really happen? And he climbed down the tree, he climbed down the Scots pine tree, and he went over to the well, and sure enough, there was the water coming trickling out of the hillside. Lovely, fresh, clean, beautiful crystal water. And it was filling up the well, and it was beautiful, and all the birds were singing with such happiness. And so the storyteller reached down and he took some water in his hands and he drank of the water from this well. And immediately he could feel it going, filling his whole body, and he tingled with life and health and happiness. He felt amazing. Not only could he run, he could skip. He was feeling totally brilliant. And so he suddenly realised, I'd better get back because they're having this party at the castle. And he ran back to the castle and he got back in time before all the people arrived. But now he had a new story about the unicorn coming and making the water come to the well, and about how the well was now a healing well. And his bones were all better and he could join in the dancing. So the storyteller had a fantastic night that night. And that's why it's one of my favourite stories. And I'm glad to see that other people are enjoying it. It's lovely when I see, you know, little hearts and little smiley faces popping up with the emojis. Because I can't see your actual faces. I love seeing your emojis. So if you want to press emojis anytime, do, because I can see them. I can't see the writing. So when people write anything, the lovely Storytelling Centre will reply. But if I were to try and read your comments, I would squint and look really, it wouldn't be very nice. So, lovely. I'm seeing some emojis coming up. Thank you very much. It's lovely. It's a way of feeling a connection to you. One of the things, of course, that I miss is being with you. And so I'm not sure how many people are there or what sort of age you are. So I'm having to tell the stories to embrace all of you, whether you're wee or older, or whether you're 3 or 5 or 10 or 20 or 30 or more. I hope you'll enjoy the stories. So now that story was about a storyteller long ago, and maybe you can see the owl up here and below it the castle. Maybe you can see a rainbow over my head. Now, I'm going to tell you another story about that a storyteller told me. And that storyteller was the wonderful Duncan Williamson, who is like the godfather to all of our storytellers in Scotland, because Duncan was an amazing man who spent his whole life listening and collecting stories, and he had a head full of stories, a head full of treasures, and he would give them to people. Now this is a wee story he once gave me. He said, here we are, I've got a wee story for you, Lizzie. And I didn't tell the story for a long time. But it's funny, in this time, this little story, although it's a very wee story, has become a special story to me. Anyway, this is the story that Duncan told. Now, it's a story he told about a far-off land where the sun was hot and it didn't rain very much. And the people had to go and collect their water from a well. Now, there was an old fella, and he had 2 lovely earthenware pots. And they were lovely for collecting the water and keeping the water. And he would put them in an old barrel, and he would push that barrel along to the well and fill up the lovely earthenware pots, put them back on the barrel, and then wheel the barrel home again. And he would do that every day. Now, the thing was, one of the pots had a crack in it. And so he'd go all that way to get the water and fill them up and put them back on the barrel and come back. But by the time he'd got back, one of the pots was half empty. because on the way the water had been dripping out. Drip, 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 drip. And anyway, he'd set the pots outside his house. The one perfect pot and the one with the crack. And now the folks said, look, it's a bit of a worry. He's got this broken pot. And of course, when he gets home, by the time he gets home, he's only got 1.5 pots of water. I wonder whether we should ask him if he wants a new pot. So they went and said, no, one of your pots has got a crack in it. Do you want a new pot? Maybe we could get the potter to make you a nice new pot so you've got 2 perfect pots, and then when you go and get the water and bring it back, all the water will get back to your house. And the old man said, oh, no, no, no. I'm fine just the way I am, thank you. You see, my pot with a crack in it is a very special pot. You see, every day when I'm coming back from the well and that pot with the crack in it goes drip, 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 the drips of water are watering all the seeds of all the wild flowers on the way. So all the wild flowers are getting watered. So although I bring the water back to my house and I've got water to drink and water to feed my plants, all the wild plants are getting some water too. And that means that when I walk to the well, I can walk through a lovely road which has got wildflowers growing at the side, because on my journey back, my cracked pot is watering the flowers, the wildflowers. Oh, said everybody, that's lovely. And yes, said the storyteller, that's why the cracked pot is a special pot, and I'm very happy to have it. So that was it. He had his perfect pot and his cracked pot, and both of them were special to him. So that's a story that, as I said, I've known for a long time, and yet I haven't told very often, and yet just now in these days that story's becoming more important to me. And I think maybe partly it's because I've been planting some seeds in my garden, and I've been watering them, and I've been thinking about watering the plants and watering seeds and watching seeds grow, and it makes me feel much better knowing that some things are growing. So I can imagine that story so much more at the moment, imagining all the plants and all the seeds growing in this lovely spring. And the other thing I've been doing is when I go for my walks, I've been looking to see what wildflowers there are growing. And there are so many wildflowers growing. Anyway, so that story that Duncan gave me was a lovely present, and it's really been helping me in this time. Now, I was thinking about other storytellers and stories that have been passed on in the Highlands here for a long time. And there was a fella called Hugh Miller, who lives in Cromarty, which is up here on the Black Isle where I live. Now, he lived here about 200 years ago, and he was he was a genius. He was a scientist and all sorts of incredible things, and he collected fossils, and but he also collected stories, and he wrote the stories down in a book called Scenes and Legends. And he obviously been listening to all the stories. From when he was wee, he would sit beside his granny's knee and listen to all the stories. So he was listening to stories that were being told in this area 200 years ago. And he wrote them down. So it's nice because we can then see what stories everybody was listening to, and what people believed. Now, one of the things they believed was about the giants. And it was apparent that there were various ages of giants. Yes, there was the first age of giants, when the giants were gigantic giants. They were so huge, heads were up in the clouds, and they would make the land by using their hands to dig great channels so that the water could flow down, and they would make boulders and they would make mountains, and they made all the mountains of the highlands. And they did all this, and they worked really hard making the highlands full of amazingly beautiful places until they got tired and went to sleep in the mountains. Now, some places in the highlands you can see them. You can see that there's a giant's head, because you can just make out the face. And sometimes it's a man giant, and sometimes it's a lady giant, and sometimes it's an old woman giant. And they are around the highlands, these wonderful giants sleeping in the mountains. So there was this huge, ginormous giants. And then the next stage of giants, they were smaller, but they were still ginormous. And then there was another age of giants, sort of like really big fellas, with, who could be very, very strong. And I think that was the age of the giants, as we know of Finn Mccool. Finn Mccool was a hero, and there's many stories of Finn Mccool, and I'm sure you might hear some more stories, but I'm just going to tell you one little wee thing about Finn Mccool. When he lived near here, you see, the thing about Finn Mccool was he managed to live everywhere. His fame spread far and wide. The stories about him way down in the south of Ireland, way up here to the north of Scotland. Now, there was a time he was living on top of Knockfarrow Hill, which is not far from here. I can see it out of my kitchen window when I'm washing my dishes. I can see Knockfarrow. And Finn Mccool and his friends used to live up there. Now, the story goes, when he was there, one day he could hear the sound, dum, 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 of one of the gigantic giants coming down from Caithness, coming down. And this giant was saying, "Where's Finn Mccool? Where's Finn Mccool? I want to meet this Finn Mccool I'm hearing so much about." And so Finn Mccool got a bit worried, because Finn Mccool realised he was just a small giant, and this was one of the gigantic giants. And he was a bit scared. What was he to do? Well, now, Finn Mccool's wife had a clever idea, and she said, "Right, come here, my darling. Look, let's get you dressed up." So she got her bonnet, a lovely bonnet with a lovely frilly bit round the top, and she put it on Finn Mccool. And then she got her shawl and she wrapped him up in a shawl, and they made her like a cradle for him, and they put him in it. So there he was, dressed up like a baby in this sort of cradle. When the great big giant arrived, boom, boom, saying, "Where's this Finn Mccool? I want to meet Finn Mccool. Is he really as mighty as they say?" Well, the wife said, "Oh no, Finn's away just now, but his baby's here. Do you want to meet his baby?" And the giant went, "Oh, I see, this is his baby. Oh, it's a big baby. Oh, he must be awfully big, must Finn Mccool." "Oh yes, he's very, very big. This is just his baby." "Oh, I see." And then the giant went, "Coochie, coochie, 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 coo," underneath Finn Mccool's chin. "Chooka, chooka, chooka, choo." And you know what Finn Mccool did? Finn Mccool bit the giant's thumb. "Ow! Ow!" went the giant. "Oh my gosh, what a scary baby. Oh my gosh, if this is what the baby's like, what's the father like? Oh, I'm away." And he went running away, all the way back to Caithness. So that's the story they tell about when Finn Mccool chased off the gigantic giants, when Finn Mccool lived up here on the top of Knockfarrow. And that's one of the stories that Hugh Miller had heard when he was a wee fella, when he was just a wee boy back in Cromarty 200 years ago. Now, I'm seeing that there's only got 5 minutes left, and I've got loads more stories for you. Oh dear. Well, what am I going to do? Well, first of all, I'm just going to say that on my story quilts page, the Highland Story Quilts page, have other stories and some crafts. Now, that I've been making these hearts recently out of bits of leftover fabric, or just coloured bits from magazines. So look at that. But I think what I'll do is I'll end with one more Hugh Miller story. I think that's what we'll do. And I've got it on this quilt here. Now, whoops, can we see this? This one here. This is another story from Cromarty. Now, we might run over time. I hope that's okay and we won't get cut off. This is a story that Hugh Miller told about something that had happened long before. Now, around Cromarty in the sea, there lived a mermaid. Now, it was known in legend that this mermaid existed. Now, the thing with this mermaid was that if you could catch her, she would give you wishes 3. But she'd also try and drown you. So mostly people just were, oh, I saw the mermaid. They didn't try and catch her. But now, living in Cromarty was a man called Captain Reed. Now, can you see this lovely boat, this beautiful boat? This was his boat. He had this beautiful boat and he sailed all over making trade, and he made a lot of money. Now, you'd think he'd be a happy man, but no, Captain Reed was not happy. You see, the thing was, he was in love. He was in love with the fair Helen. Now, fair Helen lived in Cromarty, and she lived in a bubble. She lived in a bubble of happiness. You see, the thing was, she was very pretty, and she was just one of those lucky people who'd never had a worry, and so she just lived in this happy bubble, and she never noticed Captain Reed. The other thing was, she had in her heart, in her mind, in her dreams, the perfect husband. She had a dream husband, and he was dreamy. He had gorgeous eyes and lovely long eyelashes and beautiful cheekbones and a very strong jaw and gorgeous hair, and he just had the most wonderful personality. He was so funny and he was so helpful and he was witty and clever and kind and thoughtful and practical, and he would put up shelves and he would look after all the animals, and he was just generally too good to be true. Nobody could be so wonderful as this dream husband of hers. And of course, he wasn't true. He was just a dream. But because she had a dream husband, she didn't notice poor Captain Reed, who didn't really have long eyelashes or very good cheekbones. And so she didn't pay him any attention. Now, Captain Reed was going to go off on one of his voyages at the beginning of May, and he thought to himself, I'd love to see fair Helen before I go. If I just see her, it'll cheer me up. So he knew that on the 1st of May, she would go up the Souters, up the hill, to wash her face in the morning dew, so she would stay beautiful, and that he would meet her. So off he went early in the morning as the sun was rising, and he walked along the shore. But what did he see on the rock? In the water, as the sun was coming up, surrounded by all the lovely colours of the sun, shining and sparkling, but the mermaid, the beautiful mermaid that he'd heard so much about. And he knew that if he could only catch the mermaid and hold on to the mermaid, she would give him wishes 3. So he got into the water and he went round the back of the rock and he got hold of her and he held on tight. But the mermaid, of course, tried to drown him. took him down into the water, down in amongst the seaweed, and tried to drown him. And even a pussycat came and tried to eat him. No, but he managed to get out of the water. And again she tried to drown him. But no, he held on tight, and he got back out of the water. So she said, okay, wishes 3. And he said, my first is that no one will drown, because that was not nice. Granted, she said. Next, that all my voyages will be profitable. Granted, she said. And for your third wish? Can anybody guess what he might have asked for his third wish? Yes, that Fair Helen would agree to be his wife. Granted, she said. So he let her go, and off the mermaid went, way out through the suitors, swimming through the sea. And off went Captain Reed up the hill. Now, he was feeling great now. Oh, my goodness me, the wishes had been granted. He felt so fantastic, and there was a real spring in his step. And even though he was soaking wet and he had bits of seaweed and stuck to his hair and coming out of his pockets, he just carried on up the hill. And who did he meet coming down? But Fair Helen and her friends. And the girls were coming down all giggly and happy, and Captain Reed was coming up, and he was smiling because he felt so good. And he said, good morning, ladies. I hope you've had a good time. And they said, yes, it was marvellous. And they all started chatting. And he was chatting away to Fair Helen. And Fair Helen's friends went, now that is a good match. And they watched as Fair Helen started to pay some attention to Captain Reed. You see, when he was smiling, he was actually really good looking. And so she paid him some attention. And then she got to realise he's actually a really nice chap. And you know what? They started going out. They went a-courting. And they went a-courting for a number of years. And eventually they got married. And they built a house in Cromarty, just looking out over the rock in the bay where the mermaid had appeared. And that house is there to this day, and it's called Captain Reed's house, because Captain Reed and Fair Helen lived there, and that is absolutely true. So there you go. Well, I think hopefully I've not run over time too much, and I hope very much you've enjoyed your stories today, and that you will come back to this site on next Tuesday for more stories. There'll be the wonderful Daniel Allison, who's a fantastic storyteller. He's a great lad, and I know he knows lots of stories about Finn Mccool. So I'm hoping that I'm looking forward to that. I have no idea what stories he'll tell, but I know they'll be great. So I hope that you have enjoyed these stories, and I hope that if any of you are inspired to do any drawings, I'd love to see them. It'd be lovely to see some drawings of your story, of the stories. Anyway, I better let everybody get back to work. And I don't have a clock. I had a phone a wee while ago to tell the time, but I think it's probably after past. That's the thing with stories. And I had some more stories to tell you. So maybe I'll get another chance to tell you some more stories another time. Anyway, I'm wishing everybody well. And I hope that if you can, you would pop on the comments where you are. Because even though we can't be together, one of the things that's special is that we can be together in this different kind of way. And, you know, if people are in different countries even, or different parts of the world, we wouldn't be able to be in the same place. But with this sort of magic, we can be. So it's lovely to hear whereabouts you are. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the stories today. And I'm looking forward to hearing Daniel next week. Cheery bye.
Cheery bye, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.